Ever wondered about Dukhening under the influence? That's right, the priestly blessing while maybe being tipsy. What's the deal with that? Well, that's something we're going to explore here.
161st
episode of The Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life. You might say, why are we talking about Dukhening under the influence at this time of year? Why are we talking about Dukhening? Yes, because after all, if you are in Israel, like I was in Israel this summer, it was a Shabbat, I was in Modi'in, I Duchen. If you're in Jerusalem, it's an everyday affair. However, us diasporic Ashkenazim, we really only have, if you think about it, if we really want to break down the numbers, we have 4 times that we Duchen in the spring, we have 2 times that we Duchen at the outset of the summer, and then 7 times, someone can check my math, 7 times in the fall. So this really, when you boil these numbers down, this is not only the biggest season for Dukhening, it is the majority of Dukhening, and 7 out of 13 is definitely a majority. So, so this really, as we're about to come upon it, really is the major season for Birchat Kohanim, for Dukhening, or there's another term that we also throw in called Nesias Kapayim, of raising of hands or lifting of hands. So this really is the season. Now, I understand there might be a lot of reasons not to be interested in this topic. Most Jews, most human beings are not Kohanim, right? Definitely a reason not to be interested. And also, how much do we find drunken Kohanim stumbling and they're not able to Duchen? Interesting other question, not common. However, the thing that does affect literally all of us, at least Ashkenazim in the diaspora, is this does affect us at least one day of the year, which is our final fall Duchening, which is on Simchas Torah. And there, we literally change the place of Dukhening, of Birchat Kohanim, in shul because of drinking. Now, I will say there's actually 3, as far as I know, 3. There could be a 4th or a 5th out there. I only know 3 customs, minhagim, of what you do on the morning of Simchas Torah. So one minhag is to say, because normally we do it at Musaf, right? For our 13 times a year. So one is to say, well, guess what? We're not moving a thing. We're not changing a thing. Just because some Kohanim want to drink doesn't mean we're going to change anything in services. That's the Kohanim's problem. And guess what? If they're really so concerned, maybe they shouldn't drink before Musaf. That's a them problem. The second one is to say, we're actually not going to do it at all. You know what? We never move it to Shacharit year round. Why would we do it now? But the Kohanim are drinking. Let's just cancel it all together. That is actually another minhag. And then the third, and I think perhaps most pervasive minhag, is really just to say, we're moving it to Shacharit. We still want to have our Simchas Torah and drink it too, right? We still want to have our Birchas Kohanim, but we also acknowledge they're going to be drinking, so Musaf's out of the question. Let us move it to Shacharit. So those are the 3 really the common practice. Now let's start at the very beginning, which is the Talmud. Text 1 is really the key. I have put it here as the key Talmudic text, which is Rabbi Yehoshua Levi said in the name of Bar Kapara, why is the portion of the priest who recites the benediction, which is the priestly benediction, juxtaposed with a portion of the Nazarite, to say that just as it is prohibited for a Nazarite to drink wine, so too it is prohibited for a priest who recites the benediction to drink wine. So here he is saying it is asur for a Kohen to have yayin. It is forbidden for a Kohen to drink wine and then do the priestly benediction. Now, something that we have seen elsewhere in the Talmud is when it comes to prayer, there's a very specific quantification. Here, there seems to be no such quantification. It's just stated that they cannot have wine. How much? We don't know. But anybody who has come across rabbinic texts knows there's usually quantification. Even for Yom Kippur, they say what the minimum amount of anything to drink or eat will get you to be into problematic territory. But here, it's just this is a problem. I have thrown some other texts onto here. You see text 2 through 5. This is part of a whole a section, a discussion. I'm not going to go into it, but the fascinating thing here is for Birchat Kohanim, for raising the hands, they talk about, what about the afternoon prayer? And they're like, we're not going to do the priestly blessing at the afternoon prayer because people have been drinking. Like, Let's stay away from this. This is not even a conversation. But the morning prayer, at least we can acknowledge the Kohanim probably have not started drinking yet. However, there's a really interesting text, which is text 4. I will single out. This is, now anybody who's looking at the page of the Talmud will see that text 4 actually introduces text number 1, and it says everybody agrees that drunken Kohen is off limits to do raising of the hands. Okay. So it's a little bit, it's a little bit different. Like in text 1, we see that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who quotes Bar Kapara, says wine is off limits for a Kohen in order to then do the benediction, to do the bracha, the blessing. And it seems to be any amount of wine, but here in text 4, it seems to be a drunken priestly blessing is problematic. Not necessarily a contradiction, but it really is following, to some degree, text 3, which is text 2 and 3, which is all these different sages, all these 2nd century sages say, we're not going to allow afternoon Dukhening. We're going to go straight to Rambam. And it's interesting, there are times that with various Jewish practice things that Rambam, whatever he says, it's just sort of there and it doesn't really change things. One instance is getting drunk in Purim. He says something that's pretty normal. It's pretty there. It's only other rabbis who really try to do dynamic and novel things. He's not novel in that sense. This is really fascinating. What he does here in text 6 and 7, he says for text 6, one of the things that prevent a priest from reciting the priestly blessing is wine. He says wine, right? Wine, this beverage we all have in front of us. And then he goes more into it in text 7. He says, what is this? He says wine. What's implied here? V'yayin kitzad. A priest who drank a revit of wine in one gulp should not recite the priestly blessings until the effects of the wine wear off, since this is an association that was established between reciting the blessing and service in the temple. Now, should a priest drink a revit of wine on 2 different occasions, or mix a small amount of water in it, he's permitted. If he drank more than a revit, even though it was mixed with water, or even though he drank it intermittently in multiple sips, he should not receive the priestly blessings until the effects of the wine wear off. It's fascinating. One might say, where's he getting this from? This quantity rubric. So it seems to be, we have in these, what I have lovingly called this Talmudic sources for Maimonides, because he's bringing in these other Talmudic passages that are not what we saw. So with text 8, this has to do, going off of Leviticus 10:9, Aaron mentioned the priests have this explicit prohibition against serving under the influence, and they have this quarter-log, like this revit. For future reference, we'll just say 3+ ounces if we want to help in our own minds. We also have in text 9 this revis thing, which you need time for it to dispel, which has really only to do with providing halachic guidance. I'm not really sure where he got this notion of the multiplicity. Maybe that's somewhere else, but if you have it in 2 gulps, you're okay, but 1 is off limits. It's really interesting. Maybe it just has to do with sort of like what we see here in text 8 about the notion of what are you drinking? How are you drinking it? If it's just the wine, maybe that will be in a manner in which that will get you drunk, but diluting it with water or spacing it out will be less impactful on your ability to then provide the priestly blessing. A little bit novel, right? No one else has stated these stipulations. This is Rambam's own creative rubric, really. And I will say, to his credit, because what we saw in that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, quoting Bar Kapara, he says wine is off limits because wine is off limits for the Nazir, and there too it's also going to be off limits for the priestly blessing. Although the amusing thing is the rabbis are just so... By the way, I mentioned to you Leviticus 10:9 is the first appearance of beer. The second appearance is actually number 6 by the Nazir, although the rabbis just sort of sidestep the beer aspect, and they just say it's all about wine. So they get really fixated on wine. Rambam here talks about wine. Wine is the issue. Wine prevents priestly blessing. I think he's right. Rambam's really more interested in the intent here, because the second sip, it could be a second and a half. It's not a huge time gap. It seems to be more about intent. But really, I think really what comes out of this is he's cobbling this together whole cloth, this whole structure, and he's doing it, for lack of a better term, in a Frankensteinian way. Like, he's taking disparate parts from different parts of Talmudic passages and trying to put them together here, rather than just saying, I mean, one thing he could have done is just to I don't know, paraphrase, maybe not directly quote what we saw in the Talmud was, once you have wine, it's off limits. And he's at least trying to provide outs or loopholes to enable Kohanim, despite having some wine, to nevertheless still be able to provide that blessing. Hey there, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. As we're talking about drinking and perhaps even getting drunk, we're going to be embarking after the holidays. That's right, we're going to be taking a break. We're going to be taking a whole series of exploring drunkenness in Judaism, starting, and here's a sneak peek, on drunkenness in the Bible.
And I think that that's very telling, because it would seem to me that there are also other texts in the Hebrew Bible in which alcohol is used as a precursor to sexual intercourse or other sexual interaction.
Hope you enjoyed that sneak peek into our next episode, Drunkenness into the Bible, which, as I mentioned, won't be taking place until November. I hope you enjoy the holidays. Happy holidays. And now back into this episode. We're going to transition to some more medieval texts. So we're going to move to text 11, which is Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, his famous tour. So I'm actually not going to read it, because what he does is just say what the Rambam said. He just copied and pasted Rambam. He is heavily and highly influenced by Rambam. That's no surprise. He copies and pastes. Boom, Rambam. Okay. So Rambam's really influential here. I mean, I'm not saying that Rambam's not normally influential, but here he really sets sort of the paradigm here. And guess what? When we get to the Shulchan Aruch in text 12, the same, really the same. I mean, maybe it's not, I'm sure we could put them next to each other and compare. For our purposes, it's basically the same. So Rambam really is setting the expectations here. But here's something new. We get to text 15, also still Rav Karo. He says, a drunk Kohen should not raise his hands. Now we have something new. Rabbi Yerucham ben Meshulam, who's a early 14th century rabbi, wrote, it seems to me that a Kohen should not raise his hands when he has reached the drunkenness of Lot, as we say generally. He's referring to something in Eruvin 65a. Now, we're going to pause us, because if anybody remembers Genesis chapter 19, the story of Lot and his daughters, this is fascinating because the Torah doesn't even refer to him as being drunk. It doesn't even need this word of being drunk. It has the word. It used it in chapter 9 by Noah, but we all know he is drunk off of his face. He has no idea what's flying. I think the text says he didn't know what was going up or down, so he really had no idea. The Talmudic reference here that Rabbinic Yerucham is pointing to is, there is Breita on that page, that an early rabbinic teaching that says all these different things. If someone is drunk, they are exempt from prayer. They're exempt from tefillah if they are drunk. Now that is an early rabbinic text. And then we have a subsequent rabbi who then chimes in and says, but purchases, selling things, damages, then this person, they don't even know what they're doing. So
they're using the term pater? You say if they're so drunk, they're exempt?
Yeah.
Pater is like...
so in there...
It's like used, like if you're in the performance of a mitzvah, you're pater from doing another mitzvah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think that this would be kind of the equivalent.
Yeah, the language very explicitly in that Breita, in that early Talmudic text, says someone who is drunk is exempt from tefillah. They're exempt. Which does remind us of a lot of this language in the Mishnah and stuff in Brachot, which if you're doing X, Y, Z, you're patur from tefillah. And there are things in Brachot that you are legitimately patur from tefillah. In Eruvin, it says if you're drunk, you're patur from tefillah too. It's a whole separate, maybe a separate conversation, but yes.
But you can still buy and sell drunk, and that's totally fine.
Yes. Yes, and then, yes. But then once you get to the drunkenness of Lot, then sort of all bets are off, which is a really fascinating thing. That seems to be what he's drawing from. He's pulling from that Talmudic text and saying, you know what? Up until the point, or once you've reached the drunkenness of Lot, then you shouldn't be doing it. Now Rabbi Cairo kicks in after quoting him. He says, it seems from his words that the reason of the prohibition of a drunk Kohen raising his hands is because it is similar to prayer. But it does not make sense to me, since Bar Kapara juxtaposed the blessing of the priest to the priest serving, as is written, to serve and to bless. And similarly did Maimonides write, and according to this, even if he drank a quarter of loaf, he should not raise his hands. Drunkenness of loaf is massively drunk. There's a lot of various stages to reach before you even achieve that. You have regular drunkenness, and there's probably a range within regular drunkenness. And before you even reach drunkenness, you have like various stages until you even reach that point. Really fascinating sort of far set of the parameters. We're not talking about a few ounces here. So we're going from like a few ounces for Maimonides to you just cannot be as drunk as low, which is a massive gap between the two opinions. I have put in the subsequent sources here from the Talmud, text 16, Ray, it talks about, this is the text that says they're exempt from prayer. Text 17 is Rabbi Chanina, who says, that's only if they haven't reached, but one who has reached Shichoto Shalo, the lots of intoxication, they're exempt from all of them. But we also have here text 18 and 19, which talks about prayer and drunkenness. You're welcome to read those as sort of parameters, but that's for tefillah. Is Nesias Kapayim the same level, or the same status? It seems that that's not really part of the equation here. With text 20, I know I didn't translate it. I will, however, point out the final lines, because a lot of the earlier stuff is it's not really related to the drinking. It's more like the mechanics of what do we consider the relationship to the prohibition. He ultimately says, really the thing is about wine specifically, but other things, yeah, you know what, maybe nevertheless, it should also be off limits for anything else intoxicating. Why should we restrict ourselves only to wine? He says, and definitely if you're drunk, yeah, you shouldn't be doing this. And ultimately what he says in the final line, he says, Asa the Kohen lishot klo midei demishacher kodem nesias kapayim. He says, ultimately it's forbidden for Kohanim to drink any intoxicating beverages prior to raising their hands. That's really how he concludes. This is Rabbi David Alevi Siegel, 17th century rabbi. Another 17th century rabbi in text 21 is really fascinating. Okay, whether you agree or disagree, text 21 is deeply fascinating and remarkably changes the contours of the conversation. Now he quotes, now we've seen Rabbeinu Yerucham, we saw him quoted by Rabbi Yosef Karo. Rabbeinu Yerucham ben Meshulam wrote, it seems to me that drunk is specifically when one reaches the drunkenness of loath that a Kohen should not raise his hands. But Rabbi Yosef Karo disagreed upon this approach. See there, okay. But it seems to me that Rabbi Yerucham's words are clear and correct, since we learn in the Talmud the juxtapositioning of the blessing of the Kohanim from the Nazarite who is forbidden from wine, and if so, then other beverages would be permissible, such as with the Nazarite. And also, Maimonides wrote there are 6 things that hold a Kohen back. Wine, and he wrote, one who drank a revit of wine. There's no death penalty for a Kohen who serves under the influence of non-wine beverages in the temple, unless, however, a Kohen is as drunk as Lot was, then he would be exempt from all mitzvot. And this is inferable that even if he was unable to speak in front of the king, he would be permitted to raise his hands. Sin is not compared to prayer. And I'm not able to discern Rabbi Cairo's words that Rabbeinu Yerucham, okay, I'm not going to go there. Now, it seems to me that if a Kohen drank wine from the winepress, basically we're talking grape juice now, right? It is non-alcoholic wine. He would be unfit to raise his hands since a Nazarite is forbidden from consuming it. At that point, it's not about the alcoholic aspect. It's just simply about the wine aspect. It is juice of grapes, therefore it is wine. And also, it is off limits for a Kohen to drink it for the temple service. Therefore, Maimonides didn't mention it here, and see, okay. He's doing 2 different things. I'll start with the last thing first, which is that even fresh wine, which in our days we would call grape juice, that's a problem. That's a problem for Kohanim to be drinking, because that's wine. That's like a Nazir. That's off limits.
If you're linking the whole issue to the Nazir,
right?
Yeah, I mean,
that's text number 1. That's where we started. And he's saying, look, also with the Nazir, we're really, even though the Nazir talks about beer, but the rabbis interpret it as just intoxicating wine, not actually as beer. So he's saying, but maybe other intoxicating, because ultimately he agrees with you, Rabbeinu Yerucham, that you can be as drunk, almost to the limits of Lot's drunkenness. So you can get drunk on all these things, but you shouldn't be having even grape juice. Which means he's providing this window for non-wine alcohol intoxicating beverages, and you could be drunk, you just can't be drunk to the lowest level.
But if you get to that level,
then you're off limits. You just can't do it. So now that leads us into text 22, which really for me, I'll just to tell you, this for me was the text that opened up this whole topic, because I always, as a Kohen, was under the understanding that I am not allowed to have even a drop of alcohol prior to Dukhening. That was it. End of conversation. Not even a drop. Off limits. Right? Think about Simchas Torah. Like, you can't even have a drop. Well, that's the funny thing, because during Sukkot, where people are out having Kiddush Club, and I look longingly over there and think, I can't join you. I have to duchen. Text 22 is really fascinating. So Rabbi Danzig, the author of the Sefer Chai Adam, he says, what is this wine situation, which he starts off the same way that Rambam talks about? He says, a Kohen who... Actually, I'm not going to read this, because it's going to be very familiar. It's going to be basically what Rambam wrote. But then he writes something else. After he basically quotes Rambam, he then continues, and if he drank other intoxicating beverages, such as either whiskey or mead, there is a disagreement amongst rabbis in recent centuries, and therefore it is appropriate for a Kohen to not drink any intoxicating beverage prior to raising hands. Stopping here, he says, just don't drink anything. Leave it at that. But he continues. Nevertheless, a Kohen who is weakened and unable to raise his hands if he does not taste anything is permitted to sanctify upon a revius of wine, right? Because after all, like, revius of wine is the minimum what you are supposed to do Kiddush on. Sanctify upon a revius of wine in which he places some water, or that he drinks with a couple of gulps. So now he's adhering to Rambam's regulations, right? And with regards to how much he needs to drink of sanctification wine, right, the Kiddush wine, he needs only to drink a cheeksful. Oh, yeah, malo lugmav, right? He drinks a cheeksful, right? So that way you satisfy the minimum requirement of how much you're supposed to do Kiddush on, the minimum requirement what you are supposed to drink for Kiddush, and with all of this, he is permitted to sanctify in such situations upon mead, or maybe even taste some whiskey, in order that he not lose out on this prescriptive mitzvah. Hey, maybe you just need a little bit of whiskey to get you going. Put a little bit of pep in your step and go up and do the blessing.
How much whiskey? How much whiskey? Cheekful?
Well, he actually says ma'at. So, and it's not, it seems to be, it's interesting. He says it's permissible for the Kohen to do Kiddush on this. So just tasting a little. Now, he doesn't quantify it. He tastes, which is also, it sounds like a whole separate topic of, like, does Rabbi Danzig here allow you to drink a smaller quantity of whiskey for Kiddush than wine, which sounds like that's a different conversation, which I don't know. I mean, I should look in the Chai Adam.
Right.
But it's interesting. He starts off by saying no Kohanim should be drinking, but if you need the energy, if it really just does make me think about Popeye, right? Just put some spinach in you, and like you got it, right? Just have some whiskey, have some wine, and boom, you go off to do Nesias K'mayim.
Little stage fright.
Right, a little liquid courage to give the blessing, right? That is a really fascinating text. Really very exhilarating between these two texts, text 21 and 22. Those are such, like, I'm biased, but like those are really fascinating texts. Hey there, I wanted to break in yet again. Although I asked for support in financial ways, because it does cost some money to make the hosting happen and other aspects of Jewish drinking happen. So your financial support is definitely appreciated. And don't forget, you can go to jewishdrinking.com/donate. But also, another way of supporting the show and everything that Jewish Drinking does is also to tell your friends, tell your neighbors. If you like this content, if you like this show, maybe people also like it. So feel free to let them know, hey, I have this interesting episode I heard, or a few episodes, or whatever it is, or even a few clips. Feel free to share with your friends. All right, thank you so much. Now back into the show. We have text 24. We are not going to go through this entirety. You are more than welcome to read what Rabbi Epstein here in the end of the 19th century wrote. There isn't anything here you haven't already read, but the amusing thing is, especially for our purposes, he does quote Rabbi Gombiner who quotes Rabbi Yerucham, right? Amusingly, at the very end, he says, and parenthetically, Rabbi Gominer argues on Rabbi Cairo there, although his words are unclear to me. Which is funny because Rabbi Gominer says, it is clear what Rabbi Yerucham said. I buy into it wholeheartedly. And then here he's like, I'm not really sure. I think for us, what's significant is really, Rabbi Cairo really made sure to mention Rabbeinu Yerucham. It's really what Beit Yosef is all about. Rabbi Cairo's really trying to be inclusive of salient points amongst the medieval rabbis. No one seems to really be talking about it until Rabbi Gombiner. He really brings it alive. He buys into it, and he's a really significant voice in halacha, and Rabbi Epstein can't ignore it. He's not happy with it. This is Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen Kagan. Many people know him as the Chafetz Chaim. This is the Mishnah Berurah. Fun fact, he is a Kohen. Okay, so he's one of my fellow sons of Aaron. So he says, this C99.2, that has to do with, I think it's tefillah, which is relevant here as well. And all of this is with regards to wine. Okay, just wine, wine is fine. You shouldn't do it before Dukhening. But with regards to other intoxicating beverages, Rabbi Gombiner wrote that it is permissible for a Kohen to raise his hands, even if he is drunk enough that he is unable to speak before the king, that prayer in such situations will be considered an abominable prayer as above in section 99. Okay, that's a whole separate topic. With raising hands, it would be permissible if a Kohen, as long as the Kohen has not reached the drunkenness low, since he would then be considered as an idiot. And such is written by Rabbi Yehuda Ayash and his Judah staff. But many rabbis in recent centuries have argued upon him and opine that also with non-wine beverages that any Kohen has gotten drunk to the point that he cannot speak before the king should not raise his hands, which is actually a lower level now. So drunk to the point you are low drunkenness, that's a really high bar. But what about you're not able to speak before the king? Which is interesting. If you're not able to speak before the king, how much words are you able to get out for blessing? Right now, which makes it's a really good question by this rabbi he's quoting here, this Rabbi Ayash, that if you can't really speak before the king, what words are able to come out of your mouth for the priestly blessing? Which is a really good question. But many rabbis in recent centuries have argued upon him and opine that regarding wine from the wine press, Rabbi Gombiner's opinion is to prohibit a Kohen from raising his hands, but many rabbis in recent centuries disagree with him upon this since it does not intoxicate. That you've taken this connection of connecting priestly blessing with Nazir too far. Having grape juice, that shouldn't be problematic. Our concern here is with drunkenness and intoxication, not with the consumption of any grape products. So that's, he's like, you've gone too far with this. But it is interesting earlier here where whether or not one can get to the drunkenness of low, but maybe having a lower barrier, a lower level of saying, if you can't speak in front of the king, how much are you really going to be able to articulate the blessings for the priestly blessing? Our final text of the evening is this text 26, also Rabbi Kagan. This is the Biur Halacha. He says, look in Rabbi Cairo's Yosef's house, Beit Yosef, what he quoted from the name of Rabbi Yerucham ben Meshulam and seeing the laws of raising hands in the Eshkol, who mentions there are rabbis who allow raising of hands is only prohibited for Kohanim who are drunk, and not necessarily just having consumed a revis of wine, a few ounces. See there. And nevertheless, so meaning, what is drunk? Maybe you could have had multiple ounces. Maybe you've had a few beers. Maybe you're just not drunk. And nevertheless, there is a difference between this opinion versus that of Rabbeinu Yerucham, that they are stringent there. I think we can all agree. Rabbeinu Yerucham saying, as long as you're not drunk as low, like, that's a huge amount. And nevertheless, there is a difference between this opinion versus that of Rabbeinu Yerucham, that they are stringent there in any event with someone who is unable to speak before the king, while Rabbeinu Yerucham only specifically finds it problematic to be drunk to the level of low, and therefore we need the explanation of Rabbi Gominer. See there. And nevertheless, the ruling upon which many rabbis in recent centuries have agreed is that any Kohen who is unable to speak in front of the king, having consumed even non-wine beverages, is forbidden from raising his hands, as I wrote in the Mishnah Berurah. There seems to be multiple sort of levels. There's drunkenness is low, which is a huge, I think that's just an extreme version of it, an extreme level. There's drunken. Going below that, there's drunkenness, which I don't know. Like, is drunkenness really okay for someone to say the priestly blessing? That's really fascinating. Lower than that, you have this. What he's just talking about is: are you able to speak in front of the king? Like, are you able to manage to arrange your words in such a fashion? It's fascinating. What are we talking about, right? With prayer, there's a notion that we should have kavanat halev. We should have mental intentionality. We should be understanding what the words are that we are saying, that we are davening, that we're praying. We don't have that by priestly benediction. We by Birchat Kohanim. No one says we need that. And one of the helpful things is when we, and I don't know what it used to be centuries ago, but I do know nowadays, you have the Shaliach Tzibor, you have the person leading the davening, and they announce word for word, right? So if you are under the influence, and I don't know, you could be however,
or you don't know the blessing.
Right. So, well, here's the fascinating thing is you could be like, I don't know, you don't have to be three sheets to the wind, but like, or maybe you are drunk. Let's say you are drunk, right? Maybe you are drunk. Usually drunk people are able to repeat a word they just heard, right? Mm-hmm. And if that's all it takes, you can raise your hands and, maybe you have, drunken energy like Popeye spinach, right? And you have your your hands raised. You don't have to remember a thing. I just have to repeat what I hear him saying. Okay, Yivarecha, right? And that doesn't require any intentionality. You just have to be, and which is, maybe there's a whole other philosophical thing. Is like, are you just the vessel for which this to be passed through? You are not the one generating the tefillah. Like with prayer, you do need kavana. Here, no one said anything about that. And I think that's why certain of these rabbis, are willing to give drunk people a pass. They say, you can do this. Why not? There's no requirement of kavana. Drunkenness alone, now everybody agrees that's a problem. Drunk, that's a debate. What about able to speak before the king or not? That becomes a debate.
But how we get from Rambam, which basically limits it to a revius, being somewhat inebriated.
Yeah.
That's a big jump.
It's a big gap. Rabbeinu Yerucham did not see it the way the Rambam saw it. And it may be that embedded here when he says, especially in the Biur Halacha, that you're not able to speak in front of the king, could be that like that's one of the levels of drunkenness. Like you could be a part of, like there's a drunkenness where you're not able to speak in front of the king, but there's also maybe a drunkenness you are. And so that also becomes an interesting sort of gauge.
I like the idea that when you mentioned that the Kohen is really a vessel.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have to have this kavanah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You just have to say the words.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting idea.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's also interesting, like what you were saying about, being able to speak before the king, because, like whether you have alcohol or not, if you don't have that right kind of mindset, then,
well, that's,
what I'm saying? Because like,
yeah. So that's actually one of the stipulations for tefillah.
Right.
That's in Eruvin where it says you just once you get to once you've had whatever it is, you just need to be able to speak in front of the king.
Yeah.
So why is there this thing about we need to do it during Shachar instead of Musa?
Oh, on some story. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're saying it should be
because
right.
So that's more like the
if someone is drunk as lot. Well, then he's not going out.
Right.
And if the Kohen is a vessel, okay?
Right, it doesn't really matter as much.
Then just go up during Musa.
Yeah.
So right?
Yeah, and I think also there's a lachat chila aspect of just like, let's remove any doubt from this. Let's just do it like I don't really know what the calculations were going into the Zemin Hagim when they created them, but they just said, look, maybe we'll hew more to the Shulchan Aruch on this or something. I don't know. But when we look at the Acharonim, well, I take that back. The Taz, when we saw the Taz, Rabbi David Halevi Siegel was like, nobody should be drinking anything. And so he's like, don't even have anything. Wine, whiskey, doesn't matter. Don't drink at all. Magen Avraham on the wildly opposite end says, just don't get to those drunkenness. And by the way, Taz and the Shach are like their, opponent, not literally opponents, but they're So in this, they represent really the far extremes of this, even though there's some leeway, and maybe it could be that this custom for Simchas Torah is more seeing the Taz
So
l'chachila.
what is where is this, how old is it? Where does this custom come from? How old is it?
I don't know.
Because clearly, I mean, we're talking about
Centuries.
We're not talking about, but not that long. It doesn't seem to be that long.
No, these customs are. I can tell you that at least the 17th, if not 16th centuries. Yeah, because Elia Rabbah, who's a commentary, I think he's a 17th or 16th century rabbi. He's the one who says, I think it was like Prague, or I don't know where he was saying. It's not on here. He was the one who says we just don't duchen. We give up. And then, but there's some, I mean, it goes back centuries. And so maybe they didn't have all these other achronim to say. L'chaim! All right, l'chaim, all right.